be discussing the 28th African Union Summit attended by President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, where the President will hold a sidelines meeting with many African leaders. We will be discussing the most important topics tackled at the summit, among which is combating corruption, combating terrorism. We will be also discussing the title of the summit, which is related to empowering the youth in Africa, and the significance of empowering the youth, of course, in Africa. And we will be also discussing the agreements that will be signed on the sidelines of the summit. And on this very important issue, we have with us Ambassador Mohames Shazly, former assistant to the foreign minister. Good morning, sir, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning. The pleasure is all mine.
Good morning, Mr. Ambassador. Mr. Ambassador, of course, in a few minutes, we will witness the inaugural session of the 28th session of the African Union Summit, with the participation of many heads of states and governments. Of course, President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi is taking part during the summit. He did start his visit yesterday to Ethiopia. How do you see the significance of Egypt's participation with President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi attending the summit?
I think it is very significant in the sense that, first of all, Egypt is a part of Africa. It's a pivotal country in Africa. Africa is very important to Egypt. Our water comes from Africa. Lots of trade goes between Egypt and Africa. We are a member of the COMESA, which facilitates trade relations. All these are very important aspects, and the participation on the highest level, the head of state, is also a step in the right direction. We have neglected Africa for a very long time. We are paying the price today. The head of state has abstained from attending African summits for over 10 years, which had catastrophic repercussions in Egypt. Therefore, I think we are taking a step in the right direction in igniting our interest and our participation in Africa.
Right. Mr. Ambassador, of course, among the main topics that will be discussed is fighting corruption in Africa. And an agreement also is going to be signed regarding fighting corruption in Africa. How do you see the significance of this issue?
I think this is a very significant issue. First of all, the insight of the Africans that they are now confessing that corruption is a problem. This is the first step towards the remedy. If you, first of all, admit and don't deny that you have a disease, then you will take the steps to remedy and recover from this disease. Unfortunately, corruption in Africa has been on a gigantic scale. If you take examples like the regime of Mobutu Sese Seko, where he squandered the wealth of his country on his private consumption and his private life, on a catastrophic scale. You have something like in the Central African Republic, when the head of state decided that he wanted to become an emperor, and he made a crowning ceremony that cost the whole gross national produce of the country for 1 year. These are, flagrant examples of corruption. There are cases in other countries, and most of African countries, unfortunately, are suffering from this disease. It has become endemic in Africa. It has become part of the culture. Admitting this, there is no shame in it.
Admitting corruption.
There is no shame in this. This is a very courageous step towards fighting an endemic disease, which is, I think, is as deadly as Ebola and as deadly as AIDS.
What are the steps, sir, that should be taken as the African leaders are gathering today in Addis Ababa in order to combat the corruption, which is representing a major obstacle for real economic and social development in the African continent? What concrete measures should be taken on the ground, because many African countries are really suffering from the repercussions of such a problem, which is the corruption?
We are not reinventing the wheel.
Indeed.
I mean, this is something that has been proven by the experience of other countries. The first step is to eliminate dictatorship. When there is a dictatorship, there is no accountability. Who had the power to stand to Mobutu Sese Seko and tell him, what are you doing with our money?
Yes.
Who had the power to stand in front of Idi Amin and tell him, what are you doing with our money? Who had the power to stand in front of Bukasa to tell him, what are you doing with our money? You need transparency,
Yes.
you need accountability, you need democratic rule, and these are the pillars of good governance, the pillars of combating corruption.
Yes, sir.
Right. Sir, also among the main issues, right, so we have with us on the line Linda Abdelatif, our correspondent in Ethiopia. Good morning, Linda. Can you hear me? Good morning, Linda. Good morning. Linda, how do you see the status of the summit so far? Did the inauguration ceremony start at your end in Ethiopia, in Addis Ababa?
Nadine, could you please repeat the question?
Right. Did the inauguration ceremony start at your end in Addis Ababa, or when will it start? And what are the main topics on the agenda of the inaugural ceremony?
Well, I cannot hear you clearly, but let me just tell you that right now the 28th Union Summit, the 28th Ordinary Session of the African Union started off with a closed meeting with the participation of President of the Sisi and the theme for this summit is monitoring the camera. The objective is to develop a strategy in the African and engage key decision makers in the implementation roadmap with key principles and milestones that member states and the regional economic communities on concrete actions to be undertaken in 2017 and beyond, and to commit to investing in a better future for the youth. Now, after, as I mentioned, the 12th session has started off right now, and it will be considering a progress report on the implementation of a decision on financing the African Union that was adopted in Kigali, Rwanda, in July 2015 during the 27th African Union Summit. And you know that this was a great decision. The 27th African Union Summit has decided indeed to institute and implement a 0.2% levy with effect from 2017 on all eligible imported goods into the continent to finance the African Union's operational projects, programs, and peace and security operations budget. Now, the 27th Summit also appointed President of Rwanda to lead the ongoing institutional reform of the Union as well, to ensure that the African Union structures are aligned with the demands of the integration and implementation of Agenda 2050, and to enable more effective and efficient use of resources and business-oriented delivery. Now, President of Rwanda was expected as well to present a report during this summit. Now, this closed session that is currently taking place will also tackle the Commission's report on the continental free trade area and the mechanisms to eliminate non-trade barriers. And it will also consider the request by Morocco to become a member state of the African Union. You know that Morocco has indeed withdrew from the African Union in 1984, protesting against the acceptance of the African Union for the membership of the Polisario Front, which calls for the separation of West Sahara from Morocco. But as we know, the King of Morocco has recently requested the return of Morocco to the African Union. Finally, the closed session as well will tackle the election of the Bureau of the Assembly of the African Union. And afterwards, the opening session of the 28th African Union Summit will kick off with the participation and attendance of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, and it will include opening remarks for the outgoing chairperson of the African Union, as well as speeches for the chairperson of the African Union Commission, a speech for the Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, a speech for the Palestinian president, a speech as well for the incoming chairperson of the African Union, the one who will be elected as well. And also, let me just tell you that following the opening session, President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi on the sidelines of the summit will meet with the Zambian president as well, and he will be meeting as well with a number of other officials. Now, following that, there will be a closed session where the election of the chairperson of the African Union Commission and the deputy chairperson will take place. You know that these elections were supposed to be done during the 27th African Union Summit, but because none of the candidates back then got 2/3 of the votes, the elections have been postponed, and that will take place today. And afterwards, President Sisi as well will meet with the Ethiopian Prime Minister.
Right, Linda Abdel Latif, our correspondent, Nile TV correspondent in Ethiopia, many thanks for joining us, and we'll be back to you for more updates throughout the rest of the day. And of course, back to you, sir, and back to our discussion. I was just going to ask you about also, in addition to corruption, we have terrorism in Africa. So how can African countries join forces to combat terrorism in different African countries that are facing terrorism?
First of all, the most important thing in combating terrorism, not only in Africa, globally, is that we have to define exactly what is terrorism. The biggest impediment to combating terrorism is that there are politicizing the issue. If you look at what is happening in Syria, the Americans are supporting some groups and saying these are freedom fighters, not terrorism. The Russians are calling these same groups terrorists and calling other freedom fighters.
So the real definition is lost here.
The real definition is lost. We have to define terrorism is any violent act that terrorizes innocent people, unarmed people, non-combatants. Full stop. Any excuse, however noble the cause is, you cannot, in the name of freeing Al-Aqsa Mosque and freeing Palestine, go and assassinate Yusuf Sibai. This does not make sense. Terrorism is terrorism. Everybody knows what terrorism is. The issue of politicizing some acts because they serve the agendas of certain countries, this is unacceptable. On the other hand, countries should refrain from giving a safe haven to terrorists, prevent them from having bases and logistics under territory. They have to share intelligence information over terrorist organization, because the main issue in fighting terrorism is intelligence. You have to find out the terrorist cell before it strikes. And then we have to review our media, our educational system, in order not to bring up a generation of terrorists who are glorify violence and glorify killing, as we see in the media and in television series.
Yes. Sir, this year's summit is held under the slogan, harnessing the demographic dividend through investment in youth. How do you see the slogan of the conference? And do you believe that the youth in Africa now are the main target that we should be developing in the coming phase?
The future is in the youth. I mean, this is a fact, whether it is in Africa or in Europe or in Australia, whatever. The future is the youth. It has a larger weight in Africa, because in Africa you will find that over 60% of the population are the youth. If you go to Europe, for instance, you'll find that the youth are something like 30%.
Yes.
So the issue of investing in the youth is investing in the future. How do you invest in youth? You invest in youth, I think, primarily in two things: health and education.
Indeed.
If you look at Africa, you will find that it is one of the poorest regions on the planet health-wise. And you will find also that it is one of the poorest regions in the planet education-wise. These are the two pillars of investing in youth. You know, I never tire of saying this example, but you have, you know, in Egypt, you have a saying: when you speak to somebody, he tells you, كلنا أولاد تسعة. We are all the sum of nine, meaning 9 months, that we are equal. No, we are not the sum of 9. We are the sum of 20. We are the sum of 20 years. If you get two babies still just born now, you cannot differentiate between them. After 20 years, one is an engineer, an athlete, good health, and one is illiterate and in a very poor health.
This has also to do with poverty, sir, and poverty is one of the main challenges facing the African continent now. Not only education. We have a lot of challenges facing the African continent, among which is poverty. So how can poverty be overcome in Africa?
How does poverty come? Poverty comes from ignorance.
Yes.
You don't find somebody who is well educated.
It's a vicious circle.
It's a vicious circle. You know, we had.
But Africa has a lot of natural resources, and as we've just mentioned, we have 42% youth in the African continent. How can we?
More than 42.
Maybe even
It's
more than
about
42.
60%.
Right. So how can we use all these natural resources and the youth in empowering the African countries economically?
How do you use your natural resources? If you want to get minerals, you need a geologist. If you want to get out plants, you need an agronomist. If you want to have animal husbandry, you need a vet. All these are educated people. If you don't have your educated cadres, what happens? A foreign company comes, I'll get out your copper, I'll take 50%.
Right.
Therefore, you have lost already, just signing this agreement, you have lost half of your wealth. So poverty comes from ignorance, it comes from disease.
How to utilize your own resources?
How to utilize your own resources by your own people. You can utilize your own resources by
Did
Other people or
did we
other
start to
countries.
do that, Mr. Ambassador? Because as Nifin was just mentioning, that Africa is very rich in natural resources. It's a virgin continent, yet most of its resources are exploited by
Other
foreign,
countries,
yes,
Western
by foreign
countries or
countries.
whatever.
Indeed, I mean, this is the problem.
Yes.
Because if you look, for instance, that is why, you know, combating corruption is pivotal also. If you look at the money that has been stolen by dictators like Mobutu Sese Seko and by Idi Amin,
And exploitation, of course, of other countries
could
of
have
the
built
natural resources.
hundreds of schools, could have built hundreds of hospitals
And factories.
and factories. But I stress here, if we are
The
talking
education
about investment in youth, education, and health.
So that would bring me to the role of education here in achieving the comprehensive development of the continent to help achieve the goals of 2060, which is the main goal here, and that is one of the
Long-term
topics,
plan.
yes, that would be discussed during the summit.
We have just said that
Yes.
this is the cornerstone of the whole program.
But we do need, sir, concrete steps on the ground. We have seen discussions, we have seen summits, we have seen meetings, but yet, do you believe that there were real concrete measures and steps on the ground in order to reach a proper education system in the African continent?
This is, I share, your concern. Because as a young diplomat in 1980, I attended the African summit. It was in Nigeria at the time. Lagos was still the capital. And this summit was an economic summit to double Africa's wealth in 10 years. And in this decade between 1980 and 1990, it was catastrophic economically on Africa. We have to have a plan. We have to have a follow-up.
Yes.
Because, what my apprehension with summits and with meetings of the heads of states is that it's an occasion. Television is following. And we talk, we sign hundreds of declarations, and these declarations remain on paper. So we need a follow-up. We need serious concern and action.
Yes. What could, sorry, Naveen, but what could be the follow-up mechanism here in order to implement the decisions taken or the suggestions taken during these conferences?
This is the job of good governance and the job of the countries with institutions. One of the problems of not having a democracy is that it is personalized. You have one day a president or a king or whatever who is engaged in certain programs. This president is deposed, his term finishes, he dies, whatever. You get a new regime with completely different agendas. Or even this man himself might change his mind to something else. We have one of the symptoms of dictatorship is having a mercurical character.
Right, sir, we have with us over the phone Mr. Sharif Al-Khuraibi, economic specialist and African affairs also specialist. Good morning, sir, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning, good morning.
Mr. Khuraibi, how did you follow the 28th African Union Summit? I mean, the sideline meetings with Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry, and it will kick off today. The inaugural ceremony will be taking place in a short while. We're waiting for this. How do you see the significance of this summit and the attendance of President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi to the summit?
Of course, the attendance of His Excellency President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, it is, going with his policy-related or strategy-related Egypt, Africa affairs. Since he started, he was in power about 3 years ago, he concentrated in Africa-Egypt relationship and put it the first priority for Egypt. Also, his attendance this time, it has, you can say after Egypt started to get over the economical problems, and we started right now the takeoff of having, stability. So I think his participating in the summit this time, it will go also for economical affairs by, making like demonstration or presentation about what is happening in Egypt, about the big projects like Suez Canal and the economical zone in Suez Canal, which all of Africa can get use of it, can get benefits out of having a connection with that area. Also, I think it's also good, I mean, he will mention the Arkin port, which linking Sudan with Egypt and Egypt with Central East and all of Africa countries, starting from Sudan up to South Africa. All of these efforts and this project shows that Egypt come back to its, role in Africa, which participating in the development, participating in helping our sister countries in making their development and economical growth plans. And also we should mention about the Morocco. Morocco is coming back to African Union, and of course support of Egypt and the role of Egypt in that issue also is going to be to make a very big positive added value for Morocco effort. And I think Mr. Shukri, our Minister of Foreign Affairs, he did a very big role. For about 3 or 4 days, he had a lot of meetings with foreign ministers of most of African nations, also for that Morocco issue. I think this summit this time, it will be a successful one, but we need, because the African Union succeeded in having an annual summit for years and years, but also we need to concentrate a little bit in sustainable development, which covering the sectors of economics, environment, and social. Because without having this strategy, because all of the countries is going to be accountable by year 2030, so we starting from this year, look at sustainable development, what each country should do, and also how we are going to have a strategic sustainable development plan for whole of Africa.
Sir, what about the economic integration between the different African states? Are we going to witness in the coming phase more economic integration between the African nations?
Economic integration, if we should be practical, we cannot talk about economic integration for all of Africa continent, but we can talk about zones. We have COMESA, we have SADC, and we have East African Community. And I think after 2 years from now, the three communities going to be one giant one. It's representing Central, East, and South Africa. And the other side, also we should look at, West Africa to do the same. And this is the only way, because you cannot talk about complete integrated, economy covering 54 countries in a very big continent like Africa.
Yes.
Right. Mr. Sharif Al-Kureibi, African Affairs Specialist, many thanks for joining us, sir. And Ambassador Shazly, as Mr. Kureibi have just mentioned, of course, the African economic file is a very important file. How do you see this file, and how do you think establishing an Africa free trade zone would help in boosting cooperation among different African countries?
Free trade zone anywhere in the world is a prerequisite to integration. But as Mr. Kureibi has said, you cannot have a free trade zone between countries with disparity in their economies. In Africa, you have, for instance, South Africa has a very strong economy.
Indeed.
You can't have an integration with a country like Chad, for instance, or a country like Burkina Faso. There are differences in the economic structure, there are differences in the economic power. One economy will completely eradicate the other. So you have to be realistic in this sense and try to group together countries with not necessarily similar, but not contrasting to extremes in order to, and then, for trade has other prerequisites. You need roads, you need railroads, you need shipping lines for transport. Transport is the cornerstone of trade. I'll give you an example. Egypt imports meat from Australia and from Argentina.
Yes.
Whereas Sudan is just at our borders.
Yes.
And it is cheaper to import.
So, what's your take on that?
Because you don't have a sophisticated way of transporting your products. If you have, for instance, now there are ships, refrigerated ships. There are ships that carry livestock, very modern. You put 1,000 heads of cattle here, they come back at the other end 1,000. But if you take a old rusty ship and you cram your cattle there, you put 100 heads,
you will get 20.
you get at the end 60 or 40.
Yeah.
So this, is a very important fact. Africa is the only continent in the world without a land road connecting it from its extremities, north, south, east, west, or a railroad. All other countries have it, except Africa.
Indeed.
So this is something that is integral for trade and for complementarity between the African countries.
So what about the return of Morocco to the African Union body again?
Please tell me, because I can't really make it out.
After
Morocco,
all these years.
just not just all these years. After the action they did a couple of months ago in the Arab African summit, which was a very important summit in my opinion, and they completely sabotaged and aborted this summit by withdrawing because the Sahrawi delegation. What has happened? I mean, what made them change their mind so rapidly after taking such a drastic step, which was very, very unfortunate and very ill-advised.
Right, sir, the summit also is expected to tackle the report of the Security and Peace Council in Africa regarding a number of files, including peacekeeping missions, for example, which is one of the very important issues in the African continent, the peacekeeping missions. How do you see this?
I think also this is a very important dossier in the sense that Africa is, I think, one of the continents that has the largest spots of instability and war. You have peacekeeping missions in 7 or 8 Egyptian, African countries, and the situation in all these countries is very fragile. You have to promote the peace and keep it safe and divide between the combatants so that the tragedies that are happening in South Sudan, in West Africa, in Somalia, could be at least controlled.
Sir, we cannot here forget the issue of the situation in South Sudan. I do believe that the international community is not actually paying much attention to what's going on in South Sudan, which has reached the level of kind of genocide. So what should be here the role of the summit in tackling such an issue?
I think, you cannot blame the international community for everything. If you want to establish peace in a country, you have to start by the people of this country.
Yes,
if the people in the country are anxious to destroy their country and kill one another, nothing the international community. And we have seen this in Iraq, we are seeing this in Syria, we're seeing this in Libya.
And the situation is chaotic in all these countries up till this moment.
So this also is part of the problem. Corruption, bad management, bad governance, which leads to political elites that are not looking at the welfare of the country, but are looking at the welfare of themselves. Therefore, the violence starts, and without good governance, without responsible, you will never be able to achieve peace in a country.
Right. Ambassador Shazly, I would like to go back to the issue of terrorism facing a lot of African countries. Now, President Sisi have been calling several times for joining forces to combat terrorism in Africa and around the world. Why is this not being implemented, and why isn't it achievable? Why we don't see real and concrete cooperation from other countries regarding the issue of terrorism, which is actually hitting the whole world now?
This is because, as I have said previously, we have politicized the issue of terrorism. You think that terrorism is a very bad thing. I think terrorism is a very bad thing. But there are people who find terrorist organizations that are serving their agendas.
Right.
And this is the crux of the problem.
To wrap up,
Can I interrupt something?
Yes, please, sir.
We have neglected something that I think, terrorism is being discussed all over the world. We have neglected a very important issue, and that is climate change. Unfortunately, I think this problem, it's a very serious and a very dangerous problem.
Is that issue going to be discussed on the agenda of the talks
Yes,
today?
It is.
Yes,
So
it is on the agenda.
if you will permit me to just speak a little about it, because I fear
Definitely.
Yes,
Go ahead,
definitely.
sir.
that our time will be up without a chance to. This is,
Exactly.
this is a very serious issue that unfortunately is not taking the attention that it deserves. If you read some of the reports that are coming out, that the climate change will lead to the rise in the sea level.
Yes.
And this will lead to the flooding of lots of coastal areas. In Egypt alone, it is estimated that it will lead to the evacuation of over 3 million people. And it's going to destroy some of the prime agricultural
Indeed, yes.
land. Other than this, this 2016 was recorded as the hottest year
Yes.
since we started to accumulate climate data. And this leads to more evaporation and leads to more rain, which leads to more organic material being thrown by rivers into the sea. The amount of mercury, which is one of the most poisonous things on Earth, is increasing. It's poisoning sea life. It's transmitted from the fish to humans, which could cause a catastrophe. It will affect the food chain in the world and the way of living of people. This is a very, very serious issue that unfortunately, you have given it the third issue. I think this should be the prime and the very important issue that we should be studying and finding ways to avert its catastrophes.
Hopefully. And we do care that the industrialized countries do help the African states in order to face these challenges as well, because as the Paris Declaration was...
the COP21
yes.
in Paris, yes.
It was
I
supposed
hope
to
so,
fund
but unfortunately we have now Mr. Trump, who is brushing aside all these arguments to serve the conglomerates of oil and fossil fuels. And this, I think, is a great setback to the international agenda to fight climate change.
Hopefully we do see concrete and positive results after the African Union Summit. Mr. Ambassador Mohames Shazly, thank you very much for being our guest for today.
Thank you, sir, for coming. And ladies and gentlemen, we will be following up on the 28th African Summit, and we're waiting now for a live transmission for the inaugural ceremony and, of course, the speech by President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi at the inaugural ceremony. And dear viewers, with this we wrap up this edition of The Breakfast Show. Many thanks for joining us. You are in the company of Mahirsi Rabia and myself, Niveen Ramzi. Thank you very much for joining us. And we'll be back tomorrow with another crew. Stay tuned for more coming up here on Nile TV International.